solve for convenience? Any thoughts? Because this is where we now need to sort of bring out all the ideas and all the things that are fluttering in our heads. And don't forget that, you know, one thing about the human brain is that the human brain is able to process many ideas in every second. So what we now want to start thinking about is almost imagine you had post-it notes, right? So let's assume you have a notepad. And so imagine you had post-it notes, and for every idea that would sort of address some of your pain points, just put it on a post-it note and let's just gather them, right? So we've been working in groups, we've been talking about different solutions, we've gone through the ideation and the inspiration phase around different solutions. So the next thing now is, okay, how do we begin to go from this virtual or hidden or invisible and begin to think about how do we visualize, how do we operationalize everything we're seeing, we're hearing, we're learning about our customers, right? How do we put it all down? So for 20 minutes, we're going to go into our group sessions, and the whole idea of that is writing down, and we call this brainstorming, because really brainstorming is almost what we call it, it's almost like a brain dump, right? Anything that you can think about, anything that you need, anything that you want, or you feel that could address the pain points, just put it on a piece of paper and let's do it. But before we do that, one thing we need to remember is there are no wrong answers. You know, I think that, you know, they say every idea is a good idea. It might just need a little more work. So if we come to the fact that, see, when you're thinking about a product or a service, you start with a concept, you build out your model, you build out your prototype, and then you continue to refine it. We're at that stage. So let's be mindful that, see, there's no wrong ideas, there's no wrong solutions. It's really, and I'll use the example of what Bokang said. When we showed the slide of the pain points, there was no convenience on that slide, right? But what Bokang was able to do was the way she translated or interpreted proximity was really about convenience, right? And we see different things from different dimensions. And the whole idea of working in teams, working in groups, and ideating together is really to get the best of all the ideas in the room and really build out the best, rather than, oh, one single person is the wealth of, is the length and breadth of all the ideas. So when you think about brainstorming, please, there are no wrong ideas. They're just ideas in need of refinement. So let's go to the next slide and let's share some rules around how brainstorming works and do's and don'ts when we're thinking about brainstorming. The first is, again, let's be open-minded enough to bring in and collect every idea. So we're going to ask you to defer judgment, right? So when brainstorming, don't try and judge other people's ideas. Encourage what's wild, encourage the impossible, encourage the unfeasible, because these are the ideas that, you know, stimulate the juices, and let them flow freely so we can actually play with them, explore them, and exploit them. And what we found in doing this running product development labs is the ideas never run out, number one. The ideas might not be ideas for now, but we always bank them or put them in the parking lot. And then sometimes you might realize that in the future iteration of a project or a product, you come back to that parking lot and continue to take ideas from that parking lot. So it's a process that it's not a one time, but it's a continuous process. So please, let's defer judgment. Then the next thing is, let's build off the ideas of others, right? And this is another practice that we learn in human-centered design and design thinking. It's really, there's no buts, there's only ands, right? So rather than saying, oh, this is nice, but it's this is nice and we can do more with this, right? So let's always think about extending and pushing the limits and merging ideas and conjugating ideas and sentences in that way, rather than shutting things down. So the first is that we're not going to judge. The second is that we're not going to shut down people's ideas, but we're going to build on and add to them with the and conjugation, not the but. Then we're going to go for quantity, right? Because you see, another thing about brainstorming is the more the merrier. And that's literally the truth in this case, right? The more the merrier, because what we're just trying to say is that let's do a brain dump. anything and everything in the kitchen sink that we can think about, let's put it on the table, right? Because we're still going to filter, we're still going to classify, we're still going to categorize and prioritize and choose which one addresses the pain points better. And the concept of this is that it helps us engage in richer conversations around why we feel this might work better as opposed to this. And don't forget that we're coming at this from the customer's perspective, not our own inner perspective. So it's not about who's your idea winning, but it's really about solving the customer's problem, addressing the customer's pain points, right? The next thing is that, again, well, while I say go wild, but again, let's also stay on topic, right? We're not trying to solve for NASA sending a pig to space, right? We're trying to solve for having access to financial services for women in Lesotho. So let's stay on topic and keep our discussions around the focus of how might we solve for this particular pain point and how might we address this pain point or this problem that we've identified. And then please also within your groups, let's focus on one conversation. Let's spend, so the way I would ask us to do is focus on one conversation, respect each person's ideas, as we said, defer judgment, give attention to one. Let's probe and question each other and understand better, because like if you notice when Bokang had her conversation around convenience, I was like, okay, would we look at convenience as a proxy for proximity, and what other proxies can we use? So when we're talking about convenience, we know what we might communicate it as. It's a convenient solution because it is close to you, it is available whenever you're ready, etc., etc. So just helping us think around these things and focusing on the conversations and moving forward rather than just staying the same point and killing every idea down. So those are the rules that we want you to sort of follow as you're thinking and brainstorming around your ideas. Next slide, please. Okay. So once the process is that we would, when you go into your groups, and I think we're going to do this in, like, let's say, again, it's a sprint, so we're not going to have the whole day, the whole session to do this. I would advise that in 5 minutes, everyone sit down and just push out the ideas that they have in 5 minutes. In the next 5 minutes, we now say, okay, let's sort of categorize the ideas. Because again, I think that there'll be certain similarities. So let's sort of, and it might be using different synonyms or just using different words to describe the same thing. So let's categorize and sort of sort through each of those ideas. And then the next day, and then we can spend another 5 minutes doing that. And then the next 5 minutes will now be sort of ranking your potential ideas, right? Ranking the solutions that we've put on the board in terms of and then there's also criteria that we can use to sort of help us filter and stress test some of the solutions that we're talking about. One of them is, does it respond to the problem? Because again, that's really what we're trying to address, right? So let's stay on point. Does it, and let's question again why we feel it responds to the problem. Will the solution improve the customer experience? In other words, is it an additive solution to the whole experience of the customer, or is it a takeaway? So for example, with Bokang and Dai's lady who has proximity challenges, she has childcare challenges, her inability to leave the house. One thing that we might say is that, oh, why don't we have a roaming agent that goes door to door, etc. Right? That's one idea. So will it solve the problem? Will it address the current problem? Will it improve the customer experience? So you know, those are the kinds of ways to think about it. Do we have evidence that, oh, where a woman would open the door for a stranger who knocks on her door saying, I'm a bank, I'm here to serve you from the bank? Again, so we have to sort of go and test and just question ourselves and test that. Is it feasible to implement that? Well, it might be nice to say, yeah, someone goes door to door, but if I have 10 customers in 2 locations, that might work. If I have 20 customers in 20 locations, how many will I need? Is it a convenient and economically viable way to do business, etc.? Will it change the competitive landscape? Again, what are other people doing? So let's also not bury ourselves in the sand and think that, oh, nobody else can do it, nobody else will do it, my solution is the best. But will it change the competitive landscape? Is there any differentiation around what we're doing vis-a-vis what other people in the market are doing? So you'll spend, again, another 5 to 7 minutes doing this and ranking and prioritizing your ideas. And then I want you to sort of come back to the plenary session to give us your top ideas in general. Next slide, please. Okay, so before we break you out into groups, are there any questions around what we've just talked about and the whole idea that we're now brainstorming solutions to address our pain points? Are there any questions at this point? Okay.
Not from me, Doctor.
Great. So I think, again, I gave you, fantastic. So we're going to go into our groups again and just go back to the projects that we've been working on. And this time around, we're doing an and. In other words, so we know our customers, we've done our customer research, we know their pain points. Okay, so what do we do with what we know? So since there are no questions, let's go into our breakout rooms then. And then we'll come back in 20 minutes. Hi, welcome back. So yeah, where our brain juices stimulated, Emmanuel is smiling. So that tells me that things went very well.
I think they did, but the group will speak for themselves.
Great. And so we had 3 rooms, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. So let's start, since Emmanuel is on topic. Emmanuel, who is just going to give us an idea as to what the key solutions were for your group? Just let's name 2 or 3. Just again, no pressures.
Linio?
Lily, are you there?
Hello.
Hello. So you're going to give us the highlights from your group.
I think she's having Linio, can you hear us? We're having some technical challenges.
Okay, is there someone else that could try?
Hello.
Go ahead.
We can hear you.
What we have? Hello.
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes,
Lydia.
Medina, continue. I behind you.
Jenny, we can hear you loud and clear. Oh no.
Maybe the Rato, can you? Yes, Linio, we can hear you. She just sent a message now. We can hear you. Lerato,
Hello,
can you take
Emmanuel.
Yes, go ahead, ma'am.
So, okay, if Emmanuel, your group doesn't seem to be ready, can we go to group 1?
Okay, fantastic. We'll come back.
Let's give them some time and go to group 1.
That's group 1, ma'am.
So then Catherine's group then, Kate.
I was with Emmanuel.
Oh, okay. So let's go to group 3 then. Room 3.
Bokang.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. I thought Ndatakela was gonna go for it, but anyway, so the pain points that we went for, we chose financial literacy. We also considered collateral, and we looked into income volatility. Those are the 3 that we chose.
Okay, great. Great, fantastic. So financial literacy, collateral, and income volatility. Great. Group 2. Ibukun led and I sat in.
Okay, for group 2, we chose proximity, financial literacy, and collateral.
Great, great. So again, as you can see, we see some overlaps again, right? So we have financial literacy and collateral as overlaps between group 3 and group 2. So group 1, are you ready now?
Okay, Lisole, can you go on? Catherine, okay, you were our secretary, our scribe.
Sure. We also talked about financial literacy as one of the pain points, but the other one was around more income smoothing or income, like what happens when you have low income as a pain point.
Okay, so that economic economic capabilities.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So as you can see, we've all sort of landed in the same areas. And I think income volatility also resonates with that from group 3, also resonates with that income smoothing, right? So what this is telling us is that while we have, the beautiful thing about this is that we're working with different segments, we're thinking about different problems and ideas, but the pain points are similar. So when we're thinking about our solutions and we're thinking about our prototypes, we also need to bring these things into consideration. So next slide, is it our break time yet? Or we're going to go through the behavioral economics before we go for break? Right, so I'm going to hand over to Kate, and she's just going to give us some understanding as to how customers make decisions and how do we change customer behaviors in general. Over to you, Kate.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm going to give you some background on an entire field of study called behavioral economics. It's been around for a while. There's even been a Nobel Prize won about this subject. So it's a pretty exciting field, and this is one that we've already talked a lot about it, even if we haven't used all of the right words. But this is something that we've been discussing for several days now, and we'll continue to discuss. If you can go to the next slide. I think one of the takeaways that you want to learn here is that at the end of the day, humans are basically irrational. This is just a very funny example that people are actually paying to go to the gym, and here they are taking the escalator instead of using the stairs. So it's just showing how people don't always make decisions quickly. They don't always make them in their best interests. Sometimes you just do things because you do them for a variety of reasons. The next slide. And so one way that we can think about applying the lessons from behavioral economics is through nudges. This is something that we talk a lot about. A lot of governments have actually created whole nudge departments. This is a whole scientific field where we spend a lot of time thinking about ways to convey information to people in a way that they can openly respond to it and change some behaviors based on it. So it's one aspect, as I mentioned, of behavioral economics. And this is really, you can ask yourself questions like, should I eat this piece of fruit, or do I eat this junk food that tastes better? How should I save for retirement? These are all the kinds of things that nudges can kind of help to make decisions on, help people make decisions. And we define it as any aspect of a choice that alters people's behavior in a predictable way, but without forbidding any options or really changing their economic incentives. One of the quotes that's listed on this slide is that the first misconception is that it's possible to avoid influencing people's choices. So the reality is that people's choices are influenced no matter what. If you think about going into a supermarket or a grocery store, there are many different shelves that are usually, the shelves are taller than you are. And supermarkets for many decades now have understood that most people buy things along their eyesight level. So the first things that they buy from the supermarket shelves aren't on the very top shelf, and they're not on the very, very bottom shelf. You typically buy things where your eyesight is, or where your hands can easily grab something off the shelves. So supermarkets or grocery stores have been influencing the way that we buy their products for quite some time, because they put the products that they want to sell the most in that zone of your eyesight level. And you're more likely to buy them, right when you go to check out and pay for your groceries, they're going to put little things on those shelves too, like candy or other things that will probably have high markups. So they're already influencing our decisions. This is how this kind of works. And the next slide, there are two, really quick examples of these sorts of nudges. So on the left, here's an example of just basically showing you, well, this is what happens when you take the stairs instead of the elevator. So you're going to burn these many calories by taking the stairs. So it's influencing your behavior to take the stairs versus the elevator. And the same thing on the right in the grocery store. Again, they're trying to sell bananas, and normally people buy like a packet of bananas. Here are a couple of individual bananas that aren't being sold, and so they come up with a cute marketing strategy to get you to buy something like one banana. So it's just, these are nudges. These are just ways to influence behavior. The next slide. So how do we really, think about these nudges, and how do we define them? Here's a slide that sort of tells us a little bit about the differences between what is a nudge and what isn't. What we see is really the difference is how the information is presented. So in this first column on the left, nudges are presented as information that allows people to really change their mind, change their decision. So it's giving you information. In this first example, in the UK, they did this where they give you your bill for the amount of electricity they consumed, and at the same time they tell you, in comparison to your neighbors, here's how much electricity you consumed. So were you on average? Did you actually consume more electricity? Did you consume less? And that's a nudge to change people's behavior to actually consume a bit less electricity, so that people aren't wasting it. But it's not a fee, it's not a fine, it's not a penalty, it's not a tax. That is not a nudge. That goes into legal territory and enforcement behavior, and it's really not a nudge. There's no cost to not following a nudge. So in the example of the stairs, it's just encouraging people to take the stairs, but it's not penalizing you if you take the elevator. So these are examples of what are considered nudges versus not. If you go to the next slide. So there are a lot of ways that we sort of trip ourselves up when we're trying to, I read an interesting article just yesterday that, in New Year's, it's very common to have a New Year's resolution, right? I'm going to pay down my debt, or I'm going to save more. Well, those New Year's resolutions that you make on December 31st or January 1st, actually today, January or 17th or 18th, is the day when people tend to stop those New Year's resolutions. So they only last about 2 weeks. You don't make a lot of progress towards your New Year's resolutions if you want to, lose weight or save for retirement in just 2 weeks. So what are ways that we can actually help to create behaviors that are more long-standing and that are going to last longer than your typical just saying that I'm going to save for retirement? There are a lot of biases that come into effect when you do this. There are a lot of ways that we can trip ourselves up and not allow ourselves to actually make these resolutions happen. Okay, next slide. And next one. So one of those is around self-control. We try to put money aside to actually try to stick to these resolutions around saving money, sticking to plans or budgets, or not spending when we don't have the money. But self-control is a very difficult thing. Willpower is not something that comes to most people easily, and it's very easy to get off track. The next slide. So one example of using a nudge to really help us meet those goals and objectives is using a commitment device. And there are several different types of commitment devices that are out there. There are, more hard commitment devices, and then softer commitment devices. Under the soft commitment side, we see social pressure. And so a lot of that could be, I've decided I'm going to create a budget for myself. Every month I'm going to spend this amount of money. This amount's going to go to savings. This is going to go to pay down debt. It could be something as simple as telling your friends and family, say, you know what, I need some accountability. I need somebody to help me meet these goals this year. So I'm going to tell my friends and family. This helps too if you're trying to, diet or lose some weight or exercise more. You tell folks, and then if you go out to see them and have dinner with people, they'll remind you, didn't you say that you were going to eat healthier? Maybe you don't want to order the second round of French fries or something like that. So having these kinds of voluntary arrangements that help to make your future goals can help you to actually achieve them. So you come up with a bit of a device to help make this commitment happen. The next slide. So here's a particular example for a commitment savings products. And so a bank will offer a savings product where people commit to saving a specific amount by a certain amount of time. And so they want to do this to reach their goals. So if they want to, say, save for their child's education, the school fees are due at the beginning of every year, and that this is going to be the amount of money that you need to save by, say, September. So you put aside a little bit of an amount each month. You actually can't have access to that money. So the money is committed to that particular purpose, and it's not something that you would have access to, but you save a little bit at each time. And then by the time you get to September, you've now saved this completely. So there could be some additional interest rates that are included in there, or it could be some sort of a grant of additional funds, like a matching. In this particular case, there was research that was done where there was a comparison group where they saved in a traditional savings account, and they had a bank where some additional, like a commitment savings product versus a traditional savings product. And those that were enrolled in the commitment savings product actually saved a lot more. And we saw a big impact for women who had low bargaining power to begin with. So women that weren't making as many financial decisions actually had a bigger effect. They had a bigger impact by this commitment savings product. And they were able to purchase more sort of goods that were dominated by the female, by durable goods that females would use, such as sewing machines for their own businesses or particular kitchen appliances. And so this is a good example of a nudge using a commitment device that helps people to meet their goals and objectives in a savings account. The next slide. So present bias is another example. Self-control was the first one, and present bias is another example where it's easier to prioritize today's demands and needs over tomorrow's. And as a result, it's very easy to not meet that goal or objective. So, wow, I had a really exhausting day today. I'm tired. I just want to, get a quick takeaway and not cook my own dinner. But I'm spending money that I don't necessarily need to spend on quick food solutions when I have perfectly good, food at home that I could cook and save money on to meet those goals. So those kinds of, it's very easy to try and have that present bias where you're satisfying the good now for the at the expense of the longer term commitment. The next slide. And so one way to help combat this is to have the simple labeling device. This is another sort of commitment idea where you're saying, okay, I'm going to, you don't even have to change anything. You say, this account that I open is exactly for my child's education, and you label it for specific purpose. It's for my kid's education, or it's for saving for a house. And you know that that account is something that is intended for that purpose. That's what you're saving for, and that's what you're trying to accomplish. It's a little easier than putting everything into one place and saying, I'm going to do all of these things with this money. It makes you think about these accounts a little bit differently. It makes you keep the goals in mind so that you're less likely to take money out or to spend it immediately. The next slide. And so one example of this is in a savings account in Kenya. So some members of a savings group were told to use it for their health expenses. So it was a regular savings account. They were just labeled as health expenses. Members could contribute to it each month. They could save, and other members were then put in a different group. It was labeled a health pot, and they were also told to save it for health expenses. Again, no consequences if money was used to pay for something that was not health related. But just by giving this account a specific purpose and a specific label called the health pot, it actually increased the preventative health expenditures. So for those that just had the label of, just had the goal of saving for health expenditures, that helped to increase their health expenditures by 67%. But those who were in the group that had both the label of health expenditures and this title of health pot, it actually increased expenditures on health specifically by over 128%. So it helps to really identify very strongly with what this purpose and goal is, and by putting a specific name on it and really talking about what you're trying to achieve, it makes it actually easier to have that concept directly, to marry that concept to the idea. The next slide. And so another we talked about self-control and then present bias. And so another one of these ideas is inertia. It basically just means that you're used to doing things in one way and you're going to continue to do them in the same way. There might be easier solutions out there, but the amount of effort it would take for you to go and figure out what that solution is, it's just too much work. It's too much, you have to figure things out. It's just too complicated. You just keep doing what you're doing because you know it works. It's easy. It's the way that it's always been. And so you continue doing it. So that cost of having to think about a different solution and apply it prevents people from actually trying something new. It might be just even too scary. Even if they already know how to do it, it might just be perceived as something that's too difficult or too scary, and they don't do it. Okay, the next. So one example of this is called opt-out enrollments. So for an easy example is you get a new phone. There are all kinds of default settings on that phone, right? The ringtone, the way the menu is set up, the colors on the phone. The vast majority of people buy a new phone and don't change any of those settings, even though you probably have hundreds, if not thousands of options for how you want your phone to behave, or how you want it to look. People just go with the default and they don't actually make any changes. So it's just easier to go with what you know and what's already given to you, rather than to sit there and figure out, well, if I want the screen to be blue or red or black, here's how I have to go through the process to change it. But signing up for a new service, so one of the ways that we can think about default settings in financial services is around opt-in or opt-out solutions. So what will happen is you'll sign up for a new service, and they find that it's easier for you, if you want to opt into a service, filling out the paperwork and having to complete this and submit it and make sure that the correct person got it, and that you're actually going to go through all of those steps in order to opt into the service, is a lot of information. It's a lot of things for people to do, and they typically don't do it. So what the default will be is to actually opt out. So you're automatically enrolled in something. You don't have to have it. You can change your mind anytime you want, but you have to go through all the steps in order to opt out of that service. So one example is around getting people to save for retirement. In the US, a lot of times when you start a new job, you'll have a retirement account. And what used to happen is you would have to go to HR, you'd have to get all the paperwork, and you'd have to very specifically opt into sign up and retire and save for retirement. But now what most companies and what the government has done is automatically enroll you in retirement accounts. If you don't want to save for retirement, you then fill out the paperwork and stop saving. So there's no punishment or penalty to change any of that, but you do have to do more work for it. And it has drastically increased retirement savings. And you can see in the next example, this was in Afghanistan. Again, a very similar type of example where employees were defaulted into retirement savings. So new employee, in this case, they did research where new employees were randomly assigned to a group who automatically saved 5% of their paycheck into a mobile savings account, versus a group who had to complete paperwork to opt into the retirement account. So in the first group, you were automatically enrolled at 5% into savings. In the second group, you had to opt in yourself. And what we saw was that those who were automatically enrolled had a 40 percentage point advantage. They were more likely to be saving than those who had to actually complete the paperwork to save themselves. So there was a huge difference in account usage for those that were automatically enrolled. Okay, the next. And so finally, we talk about choice overload. When there are so many decisions in front of you to make, it can be really exhausting. So, I remember in one of my first trips to Lagos, going to the market, there are literally hundreds of people in the market place selling their produce, in a picture similar to this, but so many options and so many choices. And I just needed some tomatoes, to finish a meal for that night. And I couldn't even count how many people were selling tomatoes. Like, how do you make that decision on which tomatoes to buy, or who do you buy them from? Most people default to the easiest option in that case. So if there are just so many choices, you'll just go to the first stall closest to the exit because it's right there. And it's just the easiest thing to do, even if it's a little bit more expensive, or even if maybe the tomatoes aren't the best tomatoes, because it's just too overwhelming to walk inside the market and to think about what you want to do. Vendors know this, right? So it's the prime location to actually sit right at the exit, or sit closest to where people will come in and make those decisions. So that might even actually cost them a little bit more in what they pay for for their market stall. So it's, these kinds of choices, much like the supermarket example, are very, you can understand how people just get overwhelmed and want to make a decision quickly. So too many choices can lead to postponing financial decisions, or maybe making them too quickly and not really thinking through them fast enough. So one example of this in the next slide is what we call the jam experiment. And so in this case, researchers put out, this was like at a farmer's market type of place, where they put out a display. They have 24 different kinds of jams. So these jams are just, made out of different fruits and all. They had 24 different types of jams on one day. The next day, people came back and they only had like 3 types of jams. And you would think with 24 types of jams, there would be so many choices and so many options, people would buy a little bit of everything, and they would buy more with more options. But that wound up not being the case. The researchers found that while the big display table with all the 24 jams had more visitors and attracted more of an audience, they were far less likely to purchase a jar of jam than in the case of the smaller display. It was about 10 times less likely to purchase based on having so many different types of jams. So this study shows that while choice seems very appealing to customers, it can sometimes be overloaded. You can get overloaded and you don't make a decision at all. You postpone it, or you come back later, or you think about it and a decision actually isn't made. It can be paralyzing. And the bigger display, sorry, just back to the jams for a moment, it actually led to lower customer satisfaction than the smaller display. So it kind of demotivated people as customers. When the product was just so complex and it was so overwhelming to people, they wound up being not very happy with that result. Great. Are you taking over, Dr. David West, or am I still?
Yes, great.
Okay.
So I think thanks, Kate, for giving us those insights into the different types of nudges. And I think whether we, on reflection now, you realize that we've all been subjected to nudges that influence how we make decisions at one point in time or the other. So what I want us to think about now is, again, so looking at some of the ideas that we talked about, and financial literacy is one that cuts across. So just quickly, what are the types of nudges? What types of nudges could we apply into enhancing and influencing people's behaviors around becoming more financially literate? Does anyone have any thoughts around that? And we're not going to go into a group now, but again, are we going to use, are we going, what types of nudges can we employ to ensure that, we have people who can actually influence their behaviors around financial literacy? Any thoughts from anybody? How do you integrate nudges into your product design? And since, I'm using this as an example, since financial literacy is one of the areas that we all struggle with in terms of pain points that our customers struggle with. Any thoughts from anybody? Lesole, is that you?
Huh?
Is that you? Any thoughts from you, Lesole?
Yeah, I'm trying to think when, that question, when.
How do we nudge people to learn about, to become more financially literate? Anything we can do to stimulate?
I think we should do it at a stage whereby we have designed a product, at least when we have something to present to them, the idea of what we think would solve their problems, and then invite their ideas at that stage of the product design in particular.
Okay. So that's embedded within the product. But what will the nudge look like is what I'm trying to get at. What will the nudge look like?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
So if I want someone to learn about savings behavior, right? And I want to influence somebody, because that's in terms of, oh, you know, if you save more, you get more interest, etc., etc. How do I nudge them to save more? What type of strategy nudge can I use? Is it going to be a self-control? Is it going to be inertia, present bias, etc.? And just give an example. Anyone else from any of the groups?
Okay.
I'm not able to put my mind into which one, but I have it in mind. So maybe you would be able to help me put it together. For example, say we want to, a customer perhaps wants to have, she has a goal to save like maybe say 13 grand or 10,000 by the end of the year. And then we show her that she can, instead of her thinking of a monthly saving of 2,000 rand, for example, or 1,000 rand, how about we ask her to save maybe weekly, but smaller portions?
Okay.
I don't know how to build on that, but that's what I'm thinking.
Okay. So rather than looking at the big piece, right, break it up into smaller segments that are easier to digest. Then also says, oh, this is not impossible. I can do this, and encourages them to actually try it and do it.
Yes, because it might intimidate her to think, oh, I'm saving 1,000 rand a month. That's a lot. I don't have it, you know. But if you had said to her, you would be able to achieve your goal. Let's just do 200 rand every Friday, and she looks at, oh, 200 rand, it's less, you know. So that's just what crossed my mind.
Great example, and I think we all do it with time as well. You know, you have 8 hours to do an activity, but you don't have the contiguous 8 hours together, and you now begin to maneuver around, okay, because the activity needs to be done. Fantastic. Any other thoughts, or let's move on? So we'll go into break.
Okay.
Soon.
Okay. For me,
go ahead.
So for me, I would think in our group we had spoken a lot about sort of creating a bundled product that has a mobile device and data as well. So I was thinking maybe we could actually do the opt-out solution, where by default you already have that included as part of the product uptake or application, and then a person can opt out of the data mobile device. Then you would normally just encourage the uptake of that initially when that happens.
Okay, so that's really about onboarding people onto new products and services. Yes. Okay, great. So let's continue with the slide so we can finish at 3 and then go for break. So first of all, when we think about, you know, when should we apply nudges, right? Because that's really the whole idea in terms of, again, have we sort of been able to identify that this is a behavioral challenge that needs to solve, that we need to solve? So the first thing is that we need to try and understand the problem we're solving for. And again, by talking to clients, is the barrier behavioral or is it something else on the supply side, right? And so that, you know, so when we ask ourselves, is it the fact that, oh, is it that, for example, if we look at an example in the financial services space, it might not be the fact that they can't use a phone or they don't know how to use a phone. It might be an access problem, that they don't actually have a device that can do what they want to do or what we feel they want to do. So that's the first thing we need to understand. Understand the problem we're trying to solve for, and not just understand the problem as a high-level narrative or description, but also go down deep and categorize that problem. Is the problem or the barrier, is it a behavioral challenge or does it fit in another bucket? Next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. Great. The next thing we want to do is, again, this one, number 2. What do we want to achieve, right? No, what do we want to achieve? One up, thank you. The next thing we want to do is, after understanding what the problem is and understanding if it's a behavioral problem, the next thing is we need to ask ourselves is, what outcome do we want, right? What outcome do we want to achieve, and how will we measure it? Or what one of the things I usually say is, what does success look like, right? So when we think about what do we want to achieve, and then how will we measure what it's achieved, and then thinking about what's the theory of change that's going to lead to that outcome. And I think on Thursday, we're going to talk more about the theory of change. What's the theory of change that is going to lead to that outcome? And again, it's also about, let's be deliberate about how we align activities to ensure that everything is synergized around meeting the outcome that we desire with this project or this behavioral change or this nudge. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Great. Another thing we need to be mindful of is, so we have an issue around financial literacy across all the groups. But then again, the nudges that we're going to need to use to stimulate financial literacy, improve literacy, would differ across different personality types or different segments. So again, there isn't a one size fits all or a magic bullet. So you might find out that your outcomes might be similar, but the nudges and the way we're going to use, the approach in which we're going to use to get there would differ depending on the different segments of personalities that we're serving. Next slide, please. And the final thing is, again, while we want to enhance literacy, we want to improve outcomes, product outcomes, etc. We also need to be mindful that there is a cost to these things. And the role economics plays is not to deter us, but also to ensure that it's feasible and it's also sustainable, right? So if we're not mindful of, okay, is it worth it? At what cost am I going to be doing this nudge? And is it going to give me the returns or the results that we expect to see? And that's why, again, having looked at the results before looking at the cost, because you see, the cost is the last thing. Because if we said, oh, how much is it going to cost? And we don't sort of measure that or do a cost benefit around what are the results that we're going to get. And again, when we're thinking about results, think about the direct and the indirect results, because sometimes you find out that there's indirect results that are created from a particular nudge. So let's try and put that into the space and work around that. So we need to understand, is it worth it? Is it worth the cost in terms of implementing that nudge? Go ahead, please. Next slide, please. And finally, I think that while nudges are a good tool to use to influence behavior, we also need to realize that its nudges are not a magic bullet either, right? A great change, but how do we want them to stick? How do we get them to challenge status quo? And that's not what they're there for, right? So we use nudges to sort of test and assess what's the best approach to getting the changes that we want. But we now need to complement that with sustained advocacy and other techniques to ensure that we can reach and challenge status quo in general. And then the next thing we need to realize is that digital nudging, that's mostly focused on promoting specific behaviors. That's the purpose of digital nudging. And the outcomes that matter, such as greater financial well-being of the consumer, they can't be achieved by single action. So again, we need to think about it holistically. We need to realize that one intervention or one action is not going to change and create the change that we want. So how do we continuously engage with the markets, continuously engage with the customers that we're trying to serve to ensure that we get to the right outcomes? And this is why, again, being mindful of the outcomes is also important. Because if we're not mindful of the outcomes, then we're doing these things, but we don't know what to expect. We don't know if we've succeeded. We don't know if we've changed behavior in any way, etc., etc. So these are the three things we need to think about when we ask ourselves, when do we apply nudges? And alternatively, an alternate question is, should we even apply nudges in the first place? So I'm going to pause here for the next 3 minutes and see if you have any questions around nudges or behavioral economics from what Catherine spoke about, or when do we apply nudges? Are there any questions from anybody? So we'll address those before going for the break. Any questions? Okay. Any questions, anybody?
Nothing from my side.
Okay. So that means we have clarity. Great. So we now need to think about how do we build some of these nudges into our design space as well. Well, since we have no questions, we'll come back at 10 past the hour for the last session. So let's go on a break now and stretch our legs and do a wellness break, and then we'll come back at 10 past the hour for the last round. Is that okay?
Perfect.
Great. So we'll see you at 10 past the hour. As to relating to, where is the best place to locate a path in the park, right? And you put the bench there, and then you just let people, you just watch people and observe. We might have realized that, people would actually walk behind the bench, not in front of the bench, and that could have informed the design of the park and the walkway in general. So what we're trying to get at with prototyping is that it's really about understanding how users are going to use the products that you have visualized and actually ensuring that you build the right products to serve the users in general. So let's go back to slide 113, please, the prototype design slide. Thank you. Are we there? Can we go back to that slide, please? Are we there? Hello?
No, we're still on the park.
Yes. Okay, great. So we're moving on. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So when we talk about prototyping, it's really about testing out these experiments. What happened? Ibukun, we've lost the presentation. Great, thank you very much. So when we talk about prototyping, it's really, again, before we go into an expensive design sprint, how do we ensure that we're designing the right solution for the problem we feel we're addressing? And how do we ensure that the customers really understand that? So it's really about joining the dots and ensuring that we're all in sync around what the solution is going to do and how it's going to be used. So we don't go and build out a whole asphalt road and then come back and realize that, oh, we didn't quite do it right. Okay, great. So let's go to the next slide, please. So it's now to talk and describe the different types of prototypes. So I think when we talk about low fidelity, the lowest of the fidelities you can go is really a paper prototype. And that's really about hand drawings. Now, for some of you that, when I say hand drawings, you're already like, I can't draw. And that's me, right? But then again, don't be discouraged. Even if you have to use stick men or your squares look more rectangular, I think the whole idea is just to provide a visual concept of what you're trying to explain. And we know that your job is not to design, but your job is having interacted with a customer. For some people who want to work with farmers, imagine now, when will a farmer be using your solution? Again, what will they be able to use it with gloves if they're on the farm? Will they be able to use it, or do they have to wait for after the farm work and wash up before they can use your solution? So just thinking around all those different nuances, that let's not assume that, oh, everybody's sitting in a nice air-conditioned office, or like when Kate was speaking, imagine building a solution for somebody in a wet market in Lagos. What will that solution look like? When will she be able to use it with the chaos and the pandemonium around them, etc.? So those are the kinds of things that we'll use, and we'll use a prototype to test. So we'll start with a low fidelity prototype and a paper prototype, which is really, again, hand-drawn, enable us, communicate what we're thinking, what we're seeing, and basically test if this meets the needs of the solution. So paper prototypes allow us to test our content, basically visualize, communicate our concepts, and observe how the customer relates with the interfaces. And sometimes we also go into a different stage, and Emmanuel has done this before, where you take some paper prototypes into the field and you engage with users again, and they basically tell you that, no, I'll do this before that, I'll do that before this. So again, even your sequencing would be determined by what the users feel or how they feel they would use it. So one example sometimes is that let's assume that you have an application that allows people to transfer money. Sometimes, the first activity might not be transfer money. The first activity is, how much do I even have, right? Because somebody wants to know, okay, how much will I be able to transfer? If you don't know the balance, then you might realize that you might be creating a two-step process rather than a one-step process that says, oh, so basically you might now say, oh, for every time the person logs into the account, the balance pops up or the balance is visible. So immediately, with that same screen, they can now do the activity they want to do, rather than, oh, let me check the balance first, and then let me go and do the transfer I want to do first, etc. So when you take your paper prototypes that show the flow of activity and the way you're conceiving the product, the customers can also enrich your understanding in terms of how they would use and interact with such a system. So you don't go into a whole design build phase, hire software developers to realize that, oh, your hypothesis of what the customer and how the customer would use it was wrong. Okay, let's wait for Ibukun. And now I want to share with you again some paper prototype examples of how we've sort of, in our own work around working in this area, we've done these programs many times. We've also done it as users as well, and what the prototypes look like. So let's share some examples of what prototypes look like in general, and hopefully this would give you better, this will give you more, you'll be a bit more comfortable around what your things should look like. Great. So this is basically a Nigeria example, and what they're trying to do is, again, just start with creating a new product. So you can see that, again, the concept around this on the left-hand side, the design is really about on a feature phone, because again, you don't have a QWERTY keyboard. So it's designed around using on a feature phone. And the first interface is enter your BVN number. And that a BVN is a bank verification number that we have in Nigeria that we use to identify account holders. And then basically, this is a loan product. So we're saying with your BVN number, we should be able to sort of trace and identify you. And then the next thing is, okay, tell us how much you want to borrow. And again, it's giving indications as to how much you want to borrow. And then again, there's also an other. So if you notice, we have this in bands of 50,000 Naira. So imagine it might be 10,000 Rand, 1,000 Rand. So your customers will also give you an idea as to, oh, no, we won't want to borrow that much. And then this is also a usability issue. If you have buttons that you want people to select, but then the options that they need to select are not there, and they're always using the other, imagine the convenience, right? In terms of usability convenience, when it's easier to click something than to type something, the time it's going to take. And then imagine if she's doing this in the midst of the chaos of the market, trying to attend to a customer, trying to apply for a loan at the same time. And then again, what if she puts in the wrong amount? Okay, so those are some of the ways you need to sort of think about your prototype, and as you're drawing them out based on who your user is. So let's go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Again, this is another example, and as you can see from this example, there's more narrative, right? So again, you start at the top. Sorry, you can't see this very well, but when you look at the slides later on, and what they've tried to do is, again, give us a flow in terms of the flow of the screens and the different interfaces that we want to see. So the first thing we see is, oh, get instant loan of up to 500,000 Naira. Apply now, right? So that starts you up. And then it takes you into a loan application form where you're putting your name, your number, your address, your information, how much you want to apply, email. And if you remember, this is a prototype from somebody else that was on the same project. While somebody else just said, put in your BVN and we'll sort out the KYC and all the identity information back end, somebody else is coming to say, oh, tell me everything about yourself, right? And I don't know about you, but sometimes when people, when you're trying to fill a form and everybody's asking you the same questions every day, it can become a bit irritating. And then that could be a barrier in terms of, well, I'm not even going to bother applying for this loan. The information they're asking for is too much or something or the other, right? So that's this is somebody else's interface of the same idea. And just, again, you can see that it's very rough and ready, but good to go because it helps them describe what that solution is going to look like and how it's going to work. Next slide, please. Great. So what we want to start doing today is really starting to do our own paper prototyping, right? And in our groups, again, let's start today and use some of the rest of the time. Ibuku would advise us on how long he wants us to spend. Let's use some of that time to start to draw and craft and show our artistry. And I think somebody on day one mentioned that they were an artist, right? Or they had creative skills. Correct me if I'm wrong. Kate, can you remember when we did introductions and when we did the icebreaker? Can anyone remember?
Yes, I do. And
Yes.
So now this is your time to shine, girl. All right. So let's look at the creative skills, and what we want to do now is this paper prototyping approach. And don't forget that we've identified we know our product, we know the concept we're trying to build into it, we know the key problems in terms of financial literacy, collateral, income smoothing, etc., etc. So how do we put all these together into something that people can use? That's the next agenda. So I'm going to stop talking now. Any questions before Ibuku sends you out into the breakout rooms? And then we'll just do that for about, Ibuku, how long? 20, 25 minutes? Okay.
Yeah, about 20 minutes.
Okay, and the whole idea of this is it's actually an activity / take-home assignment. You can build multiple versions. Again, like prototype, like brainstorming, you can create multiple versions of what you feel. So you can go home today and just please continue sketching. All right, so I'll shut up now. Any questions? And then we'll go into groups. Okay, no questions. Let's go into groups so we can spend 20 quality minutes drawing out our ideas, and then we'll come back and close for the day. Thank you. Let me just, hi, Catherine, so you're closing us out, right?
Yeah. Great. Is everybody back in the room? Okay, great. So in our group, what we were able to do was start thinking about the prototyping. So what we did was to think through the very basic design of what do we want to see when we see a new customer for the product that we've thought through and started to create. So I think the important thing in terms of next steps is to think through, well, now it's time to finalize the prototype. So your homework between now and Thursday morning is to think through these next steps. And Emmanuel, will those be posted, the work that we did on the screen, will that be posted to the platform, the e-learning platform?
So yes, when we finish designing by Thursday, as we come on Thursday, we'll submit it. I don't know if you understand. So we'll give you time to work on it between today and then tomorrow, then Thursday, you submit it before the session begins. So I'm going to share the link for you how to upload it to eLearn.
Okay. So you'll, I'll let you explain the, so basically between now and Thursday, each group is supposed to work together to think through the prototype and to work on it a bit more. Again, the key here is to think outside of the box, to think big, to think a little bit differently. Don't be so constrained to working through solutions that, that you feel you have to because of regulations or the way the bank has always previously done business. It's we'd rather have really big, bold ideas that might be something that is not really possible rather than very safe ideas. We want to make sure that you that you break out of your traditional design ideas and, no idea is a bad idea. So just think big, think broad, and come up with some really interesting brand new ideas that, it's at a later stage to make them feasible and to make them possible. But right now you can still be really creative and excited about what you want to do. So by Thursday morning when we start, we'll have you'll be able to share out the prototypes that you've developed. So we'll be able to see those on Thursday. As a part of Thursday, that'll be our last day together, and the workshop will then talk about the implementation. So we'll see your prototype ideas and understand what you've created. And then we're going to talk about implementation and how do you measure what's actually happened. So how do you know that it worked? How do you know that it's successful? Thinking through, Dr. David West had brought up some of the ideas around KPIs, around the theory of change, and really measuring the effect that this new product or design has had. So those will be what we discuss on Thursday on our last day together. Emmanuel, do you want to take us through kind of the nuts and bolts of how this is going to work between now and Thursday?
Okay. So now what we have, some of you have started the prototyping already. For group 1, I'm going to share your template with you, which I was helping you to populate. But quickly, when you finish, this is how eLearn will look like. Just a minute, let me show you how you can submit this on eLearn. So I'm going to share my screen if you don't mind. Right. Okay, Ibukun, can you stop sharing so I can? Okay, great. All right. Just a minute, I'm sharing my screen right now. Okay. All right. Okay, so please, can you see my screen? Not yet.
Not yet.
Yeah, I think it's up now. Can you see?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So when you come to eLearn by Thursday, you will see this on the screen. This is workshop presentation and evaluation, right? So remember, you have day 1, day 2, day 3. You have day 4, which is going to be available from this evening so that you can start watching the videos, for and every assignment, materials that are needed, you find them here. Then you click on workshop presentation. So this is the 1 presentation, day 2, day 3 will be added today. You now see assignment, low fidelity prototype, right? So the moment is still hidden now because you won't be able to view it. But by tomorrow, 6 p.m. Lesotho time, this will be active. So you click on this. As soon as you click on it, it will open. Then you will see where to come, and this place, instead of view or submission, you will see click to submit. So if you click here, you will now see a page will open where it will ask you to upload the file, whether it's in Word document or it's a PDF or it's in PowerPoint, any format. So you just click here to ask you to submit. I am the administrator, so you are saying view or submission. For now, there is no submission yet. So this is it's a very simple process, if you understand what I'm saying. So this is all you need to do. And this is very important because we are going to grade your efforts and we'll also give you feedback. Beyond the grading of the effort, what we really want to do is to look at what you have been able to do on your own and also come back to you, give you feedback, say, oh, you could have thought of it this way. Okay, if you had done it this way, it would be better. Have you thought of this? Why didn't you could think of it? So we want to give you feedback on how, to actually develop prototypes so that when you start doing this on your own, you won't find it difficult. So this is what we're going to do tomorrow, okay? Then at the end of the lab, of course, we're going to give you an evaluation that you will complete. It will also be found here. So we'll give you time to complete that evaluation so that we can also report back to IPA of what you made of the lab, of the workshop, areas that you think we will improve on, the lessons learned, and how you're going to put all of this into use. Okay. So Catherine, this is from my end.
Great. Are there any questions about how this is going to work? Loredo, yes.
I have a question. In terms of the prototype, are we still going to submit it as per our different breakout groups, or is it now an individual activity? And then 2, in terms of the lab, I had tried to navigate through some of the pages and it had said we don't have access to the lab.
Did you hear?
I didn't hear anything you said, Loredo, but I think the first question, go ahead.
Okay, no, I think the first question is whether the prototype, are we going to submit at an individual level or we still have to do it as a group? That was 1. And then 2 was, there was talk of the lab, and I tried navigating and going to it and it had said, I don't have access unless we now have access after this session today.
Okay, Lerato, have you logged in before?
Yes. No, what is in front of you right now? Yes, I have seen. I've been able to get to this point.
Good.
Yeah.
So where were you told that you don't have access so that I can document that and get back to you?
Let me try go there. You can.
So take for instance, if you click on day 4, you won't be able to access day 4 because it's still restricted. You understand what I mean? Okay, but the moment it is open, you can now access it. Now for the submission, you're going to submit as a group because you are working together as a team. So 1 submission for your team, which means that every member of your team that has done this from the day 1 that we started, you continue in that group. So I'm sure you all know the members of your team, right? If you do not, I'm going to send an email this evening just to remind you that these are the people on your team. So you can easily work together. You can set up a Zoom call. However, if you cannot meet tomorrow to complete it, okay? So I will share your groupings with you, just so you know who is in your group to work with. And as usual, I will also make my phone number available. You can call me on WhatsApp. You can send me a message on WhatsApp. You can do email. Ibukun will also be there too. So you can call any one of us on WhatsApp or send us email. We'll be able to guide you. If you want us to be in your working session, just let us know the time you have chosen. Okay, and we'll do our best to join your session and help you to, to complete your prototype, because it's very important you complete the prototype, so that when at the end of the workshop, these are the things you are going to refine, okay, to come up with a product for Postbank, because there has to be a product that is going to come out of this workshop. Correct me if I'm wrong, Catherine.
No, that's correct. Yeah, so the prototype has to be submitted by Wednesday night, Lesotho time. And then on our workshop on Thursday, to start, we're going to, each group will present their prototype. So we'll show the
Yeah. Okay, any other question?
Nothing from my side, but
okay.
Great. Well, this is the fun part. We're in the home stretch. This is where your creativity gets to shine through, and all of the ideas, even if they're not beautiful, all of the ideas are there and on paper, and we can talk about them and look forward to thinking through what the new financial product might look like. I think if there are any other, we'll stay on the phone if there are any other questions, but otherwise, that's it. We look forward to seeing you Thursday at 2 p.m. and seeing your submitted prototypes by Wednesday, close of business.
All right. So just before we go, I think it's important to remind you to help us also reach out to your colleagues who have not been joining or who have not been very, very consistent. That Thursday is the last day of the workshop. So we need them to do their best to be in the workshop, be in the session. All right. Thank you.
thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. So,
Bye. Bye.
all right, Linio, I'm going to send the prototype for group 1 to you. Okay.